Okay, so as we get our presentation up, first of all, good afternoon and a happy Friday to everyone. We are very thrilled to have you here for our training session on purposeful and inclusive staff hiring. A couple logistics and reminders. I would ask that folks remain on mute, just so that when our presenters are presenting, we don't have any distractions there. As a reminder, we also are recording this session to share with folks that if they're able to attend today, they can have access to this content. So to start, definitely in the theme of collaboration, we work closely with our HR partners in series in crafting and getting this presentation ready. We'll start with introductions. So my name is Casey Kipple. I'm a principal professional recruiter on the team. In my portfolio, I help to support staff hires, but also research faculty. So the research institutes are in my wheelhouse, OCG, athletics, just to name a few. But perhaps now let's go to Dave Pacheco to introduce yourself.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Pacheco. I'm the Affirmative Action Officer for the campus. And I work on our compliance with the federal affirmative action regulations, make sure we're doing our hiring and our dispositioning of our application pools and going through all those correctly and that we're not getting in trouble for that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. Next, let's go to Teresa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Teresa Hernandez. I'm the Diversity Search and Outreach Program Manager in Human Resources. And we work with faculty in various search committee processes and in trainings to look at how we can all mitigate bias in the search process, as well as look at opportunities for making the processes inclusive moving forward.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, let's go to Blair. Blair is helping with our technical support today, but Blair, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, hi, I'm Blair. I'm one of the recruitment coordinators. I just started back at CU a week ago, so I'm excited to be back with Casey and the team and series. And hopefully this runs smoothly. Hopefully I don't screw this up.
Thank you so much, Blair. And let's pivot to our series HR team. Jimena, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm with Series HR. I've been here for about 18 months, and I work with hiring supervisors in posting, recruiting, hiring, onboarding, and training.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least for our presenter, Susan, if you'd like to say a few words.
Welcome, everybody. Hi, I'm Susan Sullivan. I'm Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Series.
Wonderful, thank you. And before jumping into our agenda, I just do want to remind folks that may have just joined us. This session is being recorded with the intent we can share this with others who are unable to attend today. Throughout this session, we welcome questions. So we do have the chat functionality set up. For our folks who aren't presenting in the moment, we'll keep an eye on the chat to either answer directly there, or we'll highlight that to the presenter to answer that question in the moment. Our goal for today is to answer these questions in the moments for about an hour and a half. And then time permitting, we like this to be as engaging as possible. We will plan to open it up for additional questions and discussion. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and we can head to the next slide. Okay, so high level, what our agenda and goals are for today is really looking around the strategies around bias and addressing those elements of an inclusive search process. So our goal for today is understanding what bias is, how to identify different types of biases, and address issues of unconscious bias throughout our search process. So again, the intent of this is not to test you all on your knowledge of bias. Everyone is at a different stage in their journey along these lines, but really it's just a shared common understanding for these initiatives in our hiring process. And, really just to look at how some of these biases plays a role into the hiring process. So again, looking at this through the lens for staff, for research hires, oftentimes these best practices are very much aligned, even if we have a different position that we might be recruiting for. So we're also going to take a look at affirmative action compliance. So my colleague Dave Pacheco will speak to that. We've also pulled some specific data that is related to series. We're also going to talk about roles and responsibilities. We'll provide an overview of the search process. And as I mentioned, we'll have some time for QA and discussion. For those of you just joining us, just know if you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll either try to answer those in the moment, or we'll respond directly to you in that chat functionality. Okay, so then next slide. And I am going to turn this over to my colleague, Teresa.
Thank you, Casey. Okay, so before we put up the definition that we're going to use for today's training, we know that there's various definitions of unconscious bias, or what some people might coin as implicit bias. So in your own words, we want you to take about 10 seconds or so to think about what unconscious bias means to you. And then you can share out with the whole group, or as Jimena said, you go ahead and put some of your thoughts in the chat, and we'll talk about it a little bit. 10 seconds or so. Okay, somebody said pre-justice. That's an interesting one. Instinct. I'm just seeing these as they pop up, so if I miss any, please help me out, team. A gut feeling. Yeah, it's from Jay. Yeah, those are good. Anything more? Upbringing. Yep. Stereotypes. Okay. That's great. Yeah. And so there's really no one wrong thought there. So thanks for sharing commonalities. Yep. To see what we might have in common with somebody. Surrounding yourself with people you're comfortable with. These are great. Just checking to see if any more come in. Okay. Yeah, so thank you for contributing, and that all of what you shared all is a part of the definition that we have, conclusions based on generalizations. Thank you, Jonathan. Yep. So the way we define unconscious bias, it's those stereotypes or the social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside their own conscious awareness. It's the attitudes, the stereotypes. Somebody said your upbringing, absolutely. That are developed, since we're babies, that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions without an awareness or intentional control. And that's the key piece here, is that it's not intentional. We all have we do have conscious biases. That's something, and so that's something that, we'd always want to be able to work on, especially in an inclusive environment, and trying to make sure we're being as equitable as we can. But there's definitely these unconscious biases. So we have to take into place some practices to help mitigate those. Bias is natural. It's a learned way of viewing the world, like we're saying. So we process millions of information every day by making these patterns that we act on without thinking. We take these shortcuts, we categorize things we see. We're hardwired to form these patterns. So that's just important for us to acknowledge. I don't have a cup of coffee with me right now, but that's an example I like to use if I were to go and touch that cup. Shortcuts in my life have told me that I should probably be cautious as I go to approach that cup and touch it, because I might burn my hand. So those are just some pieces that we like to talk about and think about when we're in the recruiting world. However, it is important, again, to implement these strategies so that we can be as equitable and inclusive, if that's what we're focused on, and that's what our campus has committed to, is inclusive excellence. So that's why we're here to help talk a little bit more about that. So I mentioned inclusive excellence. The whole idea here is it's creating a welcoming environment where we can share, engage diverse perspectives, and maximize the success of our community. So it's really the idea of, once we have all these diverse perspectives and identities and experiences, it's really about leveraging that identities, or leveraging diversity. 90 departments across campus developed this definition in partnership with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement. Okay, so I went on a lot about that one. So our campus goals mirror many pieces of the recruitment process. And you can always look at those two. There's 3 goals around creating a welcoming, inclusive environment, deepening our ability to share and engage with diverse perspectives, and again, maximizing the success of all students, staff, and faculty. Okay, so that's what we have for our working definitions today. Thanks for contributing to that one. And I'm gonna move on over now to the next slide. And just as you're starting to do this work, so we always say when we're talking with faculty and research faculty that it's very important for your own individual, your own unit, you all operate differently, right? But to get a good understanding, a good sense of why diversity and inclusive excellence is important to the work that you're doing, and why is it important to your department? And that differs a bit for folks, but getting very solid on that is actually going to help you when we're recruiting candidates, and also helps as you're working towards retaining new employees that you bring in. So recruitment and retention really do go hand in hand. So it's something that we're starting to ask more departments. So I'll turn back to you all and just ask you to share out again. Why is diversity important to you and to your department, in particular when you're thinking about hiring and bringing in new candidates?
I would say if you're comfortable, feel free to take yourself off mute if you want to verbalize some of this, but if you are more comfortable, feel free to put some of these ideas in the chat.
Thank you, Casey. Yep, enhance creativity, fairness to get a broader perspective of solutions or ideas. Great. And having people that represent, better serving society, because diverse teams equals better science. We can't serve people well if we're not those people. So representation, absolutely, Mike. I missed one, kind of went across the screen quickly, but yes, absolutely. So those are wonderful contributions. Innovation, different perspectives, better decisions, personal enrichment. Dave is saying, so I can talk to people with different ideas and backgrounds other than my own. Yes, and that's the only way we're going to continue to grow. We even say you can have a department or a unit that looks diverse on the surface, but if you all think alike and you're bringing in people who are all part of the cultural fit of that group, you're not going to grow and innovate in different ways. So it's very important to think about how we can diversify our applicant pools, how we can diversify our outreach, and really take a solid look at, adding to the team in ways that you haven't before. And again, you're looking at everything the candidates have to bring to the table with regard to their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and their diverse perspectives and experiences. Good. Okay, so thank you for sharing there. I'm going to turn this on over now to Dave to talk a little bit about the progress on our campus and the progress of this work.
Good afternoon, everyone. So when we talk about progress, I think part of it first is the first question I think that we haven't even talked about and what we go to is diversity itself and how do we define that? I won't take a time for everybody to kind of pop in with that, but I think, what we hear a lot on campus when people say diversity, what they automatically go to is race and gender. And that's what people think about when they think of diversity. But actually on this campus, we define that term much more broadly. We have things that go to all the protected classes in our policies, such as, race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, religion, pregnancy, gender identity, gender expression, all the way going through. I think there's 15 of them. Those are usually protected under federal and state law, but we also have campus policies that cover things such as political expression, political affiliation and political philosophy that our regents have chosen to also include. And those are elements, but it also includes, perspectives, viewpoints, areas of gaps and expertise that you may not have in your department, different ways of thinking, what you're going through. Those all kind of go into it. So we have to kind of be careful when we're talking about diversity as a whole. With that being said, when people want to know, well, what are our demographics? What do they look like as far as diversity, and how do we increase that? If anybody knows, for federal purposes in affirmative action, we track, we ask for about 4 protected classes when you were hired, and we have to report those for the federal government, which does include the race and then the race, ethnicity, the gender, but also individual disability and veterans. So those are the ones we do track. So we do have numbers on those. So although diversity is pretty broadly defined, those are the ones we might have specific numbers on. So the question goes to then, as we're talking about our progress, is so what does that mean? How do we increase that? How do we increase diversity on those perspectives? And we also have to say the first thing to talk about is we can't choose somebody based on a protected class. We can't say for this position, we need to hire a woman. We need to hire a person of color for this role. That is still illegal, and you can't choose based on that status. So instead, what Teresa and I have been working with at least faculty on the C Boulder campus talking about is, well, how do we bring that in? And you focus on your pull in the background and experience, the work they've done. So have they worked, putting into your job qualification, job postings, have you worked with people of color? Have you had different experiences? Have you started programs that have increased diversity amongst either students, the workforce, other programs? Have you mentored people from underrepresented populations, those type of things? So you're focusing on their background and work experience. And so it becomes a work-related criteria, just as any other aspect when you're evaluating candidates. And that's the way we have to look at it, include on that. And it is something you can ask about when you're asking for job applications, when you're doing interviews, putting in those diversity related background and experience questions going in there. And you can evaluate that on your matrix and your rubric and your criteria, just as you do their research expertise, their publications, all those type of things can be evaluated the same way and given a score, as long as you say, here's what we're looking for, here's what a good answer, here's what we would look for in a successful candidate. And those are legitimate work related criteria. So that's kind of what we've been looking at and what Teresa and I have been working with our campus and doing for the past couple of years on that. So with that being said, as we mentioned, Teresa and I have been training faculty for at least since 2018, all faculty search committees. And we've been working more closely with staff, getting people involved, having people like Casey, working with Jimena, Susan, and Angela, and Jasmine, and other folks over in series, and bringing everybody into that and getting everybody on the same page. We have an online faculty search committee training. We're developing at this time a staff search committee training that we have to go through, and hopefully will be available pretty soon. But it's looking at where we're at with those numbers. And I think if we're at least on the faculty side, it's been an area of focus for at least the past couple of years. And we are seeing changes in our numbers. Like I said, we can only track a few of those protected classes, but at least for faculty, for example, since we began the training, and it's not solely on us, but it's the training combined with all the efforts, we've seen about a 10% increase in the number of faculty of color hired through our applicant pool process, doing that, taking into account some of these strategies, the things we're talking about, changing our criteria. So we are seeing progress, what we're going on our campus. My role as affirmative action officer is I take a look at when our employee numbers don't match what the estimated labor pool availability is out there in the workforce. And if we don't have that, if we're have a statistically significant difference from where we should be at, we have what are called placement goals, and we look at those. And if we do have placement goals, those are areas where we have to make good faith efforts to try to increase, either our women, our employees of color, our veterans, our individual disability in our workforce. So those are the different type of things we've looked at on this campus. And we'll say for the past few years, we have been decreasing the amount of placement goals in the areas where we're not reflective of the workforce as a whole and our general applicant pool. And so we are making significant progress to those ends. So we'll just jump next to kind of talking about some of our series estimated availability. It's a little bit different. And I'll be honest, just because our systems aren't tied directly into the series. So we know series HR, you all have your own kind of pools, your job definitions and what would come up. So it's a little bit difficult for you to kind of incorporate series and NOAA employees into the HR data. If you're familiar with our code, usually what it means for series, everybody's going to be within those, usually the PRA job code, the senior PRA, PhD or our PhD positions, which cover postdocs, research associates, and senior research associates. So when we look at that, we look at what's available for these type of jobs out in the workforce, an estimated availability. It's not a perfect correlation, I'll be honest with you, because there's so many jobs within series. And since we can't distinguish like we would, since they're not all tied into, usually everybody from series is listed as a PRA, for example. It's kind of an estimate on there. But you can see from this slide of what we estimate where we should be at for our different types of jobs. So if you're hiring somebody who would be as a PRA job code, the estimate out there in the workforce is about 13% people of color and 26% women. For you go to the next higher level, you can see 15% people of color, 23% women. And for our jobs that have PhD requirements, it's about the same, about that 13% and then 26%. So it's always important to keep that in mind when we're setting diversity goals. It's always important to have, where you want to be at, what you're looking at, but also keep in mind, well, what does our workforce look like? What is this set at, and making sure that you're setting realistic expectations of what you're looking at, and depending on the market and what it is. Let's hold up if there's any questions, any of that. Nope. Okay. So we'll jump next to the next slide then, and feel free to either jump in the chat or interrupt me at any point if you want to jump in. But for series, here's where some of the numbers last year for the series applicants and hires as you go through. So the slide on the left talks about the PRA positions. There wasn't a big enough number of applicants for like senior PRA positions going through. But if you can see on the left slide, there was about 23% applicants of color and about 43% women for applicants. And the chart on the right kind of tells you what our hires look like. And for at least the PRA positions, they're almost pretty equal, a little bit lower on selections for women, but not really such a huge difference. But you can see what the difference is for the PhD positions, which again, were your postdocs, research associates, and senior research associates. We had about 44% people of color applying, but only about 20% were being selected. So your people of color are only being selected about half the rate for which they're applying, whereas women were applying at 34, well, close to 35% of the time, being selected at 43%. So women were, in fact, being a little bit over-selected on that side. So it's just something, looking at your series selection procedures, what in the hiring process is impacting that. Is it, the numbers themselves, or do we have barriers in the hiring process, or one of these questions screening out people of color? What's going on with that and what's leading to it? Is it something that we're doing, or is it just a factor of how we're, the applicant pull themselves and what we're looking at? So just something to keep in mind as we're looking at our series hires. I threw a lot of info on there, so before we jump to back to Casey, I just want to see if there's stop for any questions, any thoughts on any of that. All right, looks like let me know. I don't see anything in the chat and no questions coming forward, and I'll kick it over to Casey.
Great, thank you, Dave. And it looks like a question did come through. So what does that look like when you control for national origin? And this participant is asking because in their experience, it's common to get a large number of competitive applicants from the Middle East and East Asia for any job. Dave, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, that would be a little difficult to control for national origin because it's not one of the factors that we do can ask about, or I guess ask about when we go through. Except we control for other factors. We can ask folks of whether they're eligible to work in the United States, but otherwise we're not supposed to ask about their country of origin unless there are some specific positions that have security risk issues, and we can ask those questions, but it's usually not. And for looking for it, and also if you look at it, we have to go by what the census code data is. So there's a few pieces of there. If you filled out the census and look at that, folks from the Middle East, they're actually not considered people of color on there. So it's one of the things that popped up and could throw some people off, because you looked at the federal definitions where they go, people from the Middle East are actually considered white under the census code occupation, so they aren't people of color on that. So it throws that a little bit off. And then when you say not uncompetitive, I guess the question is, are they just not as good applicants, or are they not qualified? For our federal affirmative action reporting purposes, we only report on applicants who meet all the minimum qualifications. So if you have somebody who doesn't have the relevant experience or doesn't have the expected degree or those things, they actually get filtered out. And under the federal definition of what an applicant is, they actually don't meet that. You have to meet those minimum qualifications. So it's when you're reporting to Casey and talking to folks, that's why we have to be careful about those minimum qualifications, what's in there. Because otherwise those could throw off our statistical numbers on that. And then the question about how long ago was the series data, that was for our affirmative action. So we have to do an affirmative action data for every year. So that was for the prior year. I'm in the middle of collecting this current year cycle. Our affirmative action plan year runs from November 1st through October 31st of the following year. So that was from November 1st, 2018 to October 31st, 2019. So we just finished up this year's Affirmative Action Pioneer, and I'll have that data probably coming up here in the spring. So it's year by year data. So that was last year's hiring applicant data. And let's see, just run through the questions, the PhD labels to, so it's not PhD programs. I call it, it's a PhD. We distinguish between the research jobs that require a PhD and those that don't. So the PhD category I was referencing, those are your postdoctoral associates, your research associates, and senior research associates. So the jobs that you all have that require a PhD degree.
Great, thank you, Dave. And I'm just taking a look. I think we answered most of these questions. Let's see, a question that came through. Does the university use the same process data in accepting students to the university? And I don't know, Dave or Teresa, if you want to speak to that.
That is a separate, so unfortunately, that's we have to distinguish the terms of affirmative action. There was the former programs where you could give a preference for different groups where they had gone through for some federal programs. That doesn't really exist, and that's not what we're talking about. And then there was affirmative action for the student admission cases. Those are usually Supreme Court cases. You use race as a preference in going through, and that's based on case law. So that's completely different than what we do. The ones that I'm referring to, what we have to follow for purposes of federal affirmative action, those are the regulations that are tied to our funding, that are tied to, since we accept federal money, they put these qualifications that's kind of tied to the purse strings on that. So yeah, so the things what they use and the criteria they have to use for admissions are completely different than what we used to employ. So the concept that me, Teresa, Casey, everyone we're talking about apply to employees, not to our student population.
Thank you, Dave. And I know we're keeping you busy with questions, but one more clarification. And when you were talking about pulling this data and when candidates are not meeting our minimum qualifications, that those individuals are not included with this data. Is that correct? Or if you want to speak to that a little more.
Yes. We filter out if anybody, you're not including the data if you don't meet the minimum qualifications, if you withdraw from the process, if like, you know, if you have, say, you set when you're a hiring manager, instead of saying a close date, you have a priority consideration deadline, and there's a certain ones you come in later and you decide not to view those. So if you don't actually view those aren't included yet. So it's not the overall raw demographics of the applicant pool. It's actually those who meet the definition of what an applicant would be, those who meet the minimum qualifications, had the background, applied in time, weren't missing anything in their document or in their application package, and who did not withdraw from the process. Those are who get included what we would term for federal reporting purposes in our applicant numbers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dave. And other questions? Again, these are fantastic. We encourage these in the chat. We want to help to address these in the moment, but any other questions? These are great. Okay, so like I said, keep the questions coming. These are wonderful. So for this slide, this is a high level review and overview of our search process. So I like to think about this slide of some of these milestone or key moments in areas where we have some good opportunities to help mitigate bias in the process. So again, as you can see, you know, and this would apply to a staff or research position, but we always highly recommend an intake planning meeting. And this can be conducted with a recruiter such as myself or partnering with Jimena. And it's really laying out the strategy and timeline for your search. We're going to dive into that next with a bit more details. You know, then thinking about what elements are important when creating your hiring team and the job and outreach. We're going to go into more detail there. We're also going to talk about some best practices around reviewing application materials, setting interviews and candidate care, especially in this virtual space. You know, it's just so important, that candidate care piece. So we're going to share some more details there. And then thinking about, you know, offers and candidate notification. Jimena is going to help to speak to that a bit more later in our presentation. But always my view as a recruiter is, you know, we may not hire that candidate today, but we very well could hire them tomorrow. So it's important that our candidates have a positive experience, even if they might not be advancing. So Blair, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to pose a question to the team. Again, you know, we want to ensure that you have clear skies for your search. So what do you think about when creating your hiring team at the beginning of the process? And feel free to put some ideas in the chat or to shout them out, and feel free to take yourself off mute. But again, the question is, what do you think about when creating your hiring team or search committee at the beginning of the process? And that's okay. Any thoughts? And I do have some bullet points that'll be coming into. Excellent. I see some items coming through in the chat. Who will be working directly with this person? Absolutely right. Who will be working with this person? So yeah, I mean, that's definitely an important element, right? Of when thinking about your team, how this role might interact with that team or other partners on campus. So I think Blair, if you're ready, you can pull in some of those bullet points. So exactly, you want to involve folks who, are going to be beneficial to your search process. And always my recommendation is, look to subject matter experts. These could be individuals outside of the institute or within. These could be other campus partners that are going to work closely and collaborate with this new hire. And interesting, and I think a pretty cool recommendation is, are there opportunities to include students in your process? When we look at the demographics of our campus, oftentimes students are providing greater diversity. I really enjoy working with students on our committee. They provide a candid perspective, and it's all about what makes sense. One of the questions I frequently get as a recruiter is there a requirement or a number for my hiring committee? And the answer is no. We do want to ensure that there is some variety and some good perspectives in that group, but you want to make sure that that's reasonable. So it could be 3 people, it could be 6. But if you have questions around this, Jimena and I are always available to help you walk through this and thinking about who might be most supportive and effective for your search process. I also think that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Teresa.
I thought you were done with that one part. There is a question about reviewing applications and how that takes a ton of time. And so just wondering if you could speak to that as you're talking as well.
Yes, of course. And it is, I say this to my hiring leaders often, that we recognize recruiting isn't your day job. So depending on your search, I would say let's say it's a staff position, you will have a recruiter, which will be myself, who is really going to help you go through that process. And recruiters can help you to screen those applications so you're focusing on those most qualified candidates. And I think that's really key at the beginning of your process too. If you feel this may be a highly competitive search process, I always recommend try to put some holds in advance on your calendar. We're going to take a deeper dive in some best strategies around reviewing applications, but know that myself, Jimena, we're here as resources for you. So if you receive a pool of over 100 candidates, we can collaborate together to make it a better process for you. I hope that helps. And again, we don't want folks to be shy in asking for that help. Our team of recruiters, we're constantly learning and getting training in this area, where, to Dave's point earlier in the presentation, we need to ensure that we're hiring our most qualified candidates in the process. So it's especially important too at the beginning in your job posting, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes here, being thoughtful about your qualifications and even your preferred qualifications, right? That can really help in a competitive pool, but then there also needs to be an element there of, is this going to create a broad, inclusive, encouraging pool of applicants? Oftentimes, and I'm going to quote Dave here, when you think about the beginning of your process, a lot of your diversity work happens in that posting and outreach stage. So by the time you're reviewing applications, your diversity work has been completed there. Oh, and you're so funny, Mike. Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's clear expectations to your team, making sure that folks can support this. So again, if you think about, we'd love to include some students in the process, to be mindful to ask them, do they have the availability to support? We just went through finals. That can be challenging for students as, focusing on their studies at CU is their priority. But I think, again, kind of going to this next bullet point, when you're setting your criteria, I think it's so important to have a common understanding of what those qualifications are, how folks might approach this in their evaluation. So the pre-planning and really creating your hiring team, I think, is a pretty pivotal piece of the process. This is your experts helping you along the way for your evaluations. And I always put the offer out there that HR is here to help. We don't want to be a hurdle, but we can be there as a neutral presence to help you guide through this. So I know I was super chatty. I just want to make sure if there's any other questions that have come through. And we're going to talk about some strategies too, right? When you have a really large, daunting pool, make sure that you're well rested, that you take some breaks, because it's a lot to review. So any other questions on this slide? And I'm just taking a look here. Let's see, another area to highlight too, think about power dynamics in your process. I think it can be a very real thing, regardless of a search or position that you might be involved in. Really engaging in this diverse representation of employees. The goal is we want exposure to a variety of perspectives that are going to have a positive impact to our community within series. Thinking about, inclusion of students, which we talked about, groups that have greater diversity, help to solve those complex problems better, and then having that ability to adapt successfully to change. So again, kind of thinking about how you get this all started. If you are a hiring leader for your search, one example, and we'll talk about this further on as well, ask for feedback from your team first instead of sharing your thoughts. You may have team members who are hesitant to share, perhaps they report to you, or, I think about students and, possibly they're going to be grading their thesis. They don't want to say the right, the wrong thing that might impact that. So that's just one example there, but always our recommendation is pull in the people that are going to be most helpful to your evaluation process. And do they provide a positive, challenging perspective, right? Are they going to bring a different perspective in your evaluation process? So I'm just taking a look through my notes here. We'll touch on this, but I just want to reiterate the importance of confidentiality throughout your recruitment process. So until you've reached that finalist stage, again, it's so important to keep those materials confidential and to really set that expectation with your committee. Another great strategy is having an initial kickoff meeting. Again, HR can be there to help you, but I think getting everyone on the same page, and especially in this virtual environment, over communicating, I think is welcomed. So Dave, today, so did I miss anything there? Because I know I had a lot to cover, but I want to make sure if you had things to add, I don't want to miss it.
I think you're good. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just going to take a moment here. Okay. I don't want to miss any questions. Let's see, one that came through, and I may open this up for the team and their thoughts as well, is how can we ensure someone on the committee acts as a D&I best practices representative? And I might need a little more context to that question. I guess, what do you mean as far as kind of that representative or acting in that D&I role? If you're willing to expand on that a bit, Audrey, either in the chat or through verbalizing is fine, but I just want to make sure I address it the best way.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I actually asked this question for my colleague Matt Cogan, who joined the call with the phone, but he cannot actually ask question on the chat. So I'm not sure if Matt, you can talk or write me.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And if
so sorry.
we are, no, oh my gosh, I appreciate you helping him out.
Yeah, because
actually, I might be on. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. I was trying to figure out how to unmute. Yeah, I was thinking more or less, part of the trainings that I've read on on CU's page is like having someone who's trained in D&I, identifying when there are, I don't know, shortcomings in the process. Maybe there's unconscious biases coming through in discussions, and someone who can identify that, and maybe someone who's trained through either this or through like a more formal training, but who is also part of the committee, who can kind of guide those conversations. And I was wondering if there's any thoughts on if there are strategies for having someone like that on the committee.
Of course, no, that's very helpful. Thank you for that additional context. So I think there's a couple different ways we can go about this. One, and like I said, I want to open this up to my team for their perspectives as well. By having a recruiter involved in your search, we also kind of help to fill that need. With our team, talent advisors, we really are there for a neutral perspective. And again, not to be pesky HR, we want to challenge those potential moments of bias when they happen and help you all navigate that conversation. But we also have some resources in-house and series. So I think about Susan and her role. Today's Susan, Jimena, I don't know if you want to jump in, because again, I don't know if there might be another process within series, but all we need is an invitation to join your process and we can help with some of that. But thoughts from others for my presenters?
Yeah, I would just add, and Casey has already said this, that recruitment is the work that we do and our teams do, Susan and Jimena do every day. And so this isn't an expectation for you to become an expert in. It's something that we're doing all the time, and we continue to grow and challenge ourselves so that we can be the best partners and advocates around inclusive excellence, and it's inclusive excellence really combined with recruitment best practices and strategies to make sure that we're looking for, unconscious biases that comes up, but also just looking at what makes sense with regard to making the process as equitable as possible as you're going through. So it would be bringing in a recruiter. I saw a comment come up about a technical, those technical positions or some of those knowledge, skills, and abilities that are nuanced or difficult to assess. That's where we would really partner up with the department to work in collaboration and reviewing those qualifications or those applications in that way. But that would be the push. Is one, with this training, it's to get you all to think about how you incorporate strategies, and some of those are mental simulations for yourselves as search committee members. And so that if you're seeing or noticing something coming up, that you've created a safe enough space to be able to challenge each other and to challenge yourself throughout the process, but also then, to maybe use it as a cue to bring somebody in. Like Casey, like Jimena, like Susan. And so that we encourage you to do that throughout the process where possible, from the beginning to the end. Okay, I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything, but I just wanted to chime in there.
It's Angela. I'll chime in just really quickly to say thank you so much for being here. And your guidance today, son, Casey, is exactly on point. I see Susan mentioned that too. We developed largely in partnership working with you, and Series HR developed an inclusive hiring guide with Susan, and based on their experiences of working with you. And one of those points, Matt, is there. It's on Inside Series that does say you can work with Jimena to connect with either Susan or a member of the central HR team to sit in on your hiring committee meeting. So definitely, if it's easiest just because you have Jimena's contact information, just let her know, and then she can reach out. But that's absolutely one of the recommendations we have there as a best practice, and it's great. You get to partner with them, and we've had them. Casey sat in, for example, on our most recent Series HR hiring process, and it's really helpful. Just making sure that we're thinking about everything, asking good questions, and just really helping move the search along, and just making sure we're thinking holistically about everything. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Angela. Let's see, I think if there aren't other questions, I think we'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, and Blair, feel free to click to bring these bullet points through, because in our discussion, we touched on some of these, but I always like to highlight some actionable items for you all, because this is a lot of content, and really what can you take away and try to implement? So again, to reiterate, we are here to collaborate with you all so that you have a successful search process. To reiterate what Angela just said, this could be Series Central HR for this support, helping you strategize for the search in your timeline. And again, to really just kind of drive this point home, schedule that kickoff meeting with the committee. Make sure that everyone is on the same page, timeline, qualification, what might be most important as you start to review, and know that HR is here. We're here as a neutral resource. So we're not going to come in to say, this is exactly who you need to hire. It's more so exactly as Angela had described with that process, where I'm coming in asking questions. You all are the deciding factors, but I'm there to help you navigate this process, potential bias, in a gentle way, I would say. So let's see here. So then Blair, I think we'll go to the next slide. And we always, in these presentations, we'd like to bring in some examples of potential bias. Please know this isn't all encompassing of exactly at this time when I set my hiring team that there's going to be safety bias. There's opportunities for bias to arise throughout the process, but this is one that we commonly see. So for safety bias, the description here is going with what is comfortable or what is the norm. And an example would be, I'm setting my hiring process for a recruiter. I'm just going to use my reliable group. This has worked well in the past. And a potential mitigation strategy, again, is being creative when determining who will be on your hiring team. So to help keep this a bit engaging, we're going to launch a poll for you all, I think. Let's see here. And that's okay. It may or may not go. I know we've just been getting everything together for these technical logistics. So perhaps I'll ask the group and I'll highlight these. When you think about safety bias, what might be an example? So here, for example, this group has worked well with us in the past. I am not sure we should use or add students because they wouldn't understand. We should add other department representatives to our committee. And another example here, I don't think we should have Ralphie as a part of the committee because she has different opinions than what we need to be unified. So again, thinking about potential examples, one that isn't is that perspective of let's add other department representatives to our committee. Again, I recognize with NOAA, there might be some challenges there, either kind of security or depending on the program or work. But when you do start your process, think about, are there other departments within NOAA we can collaborate? If it's specifically within series, perhaps there's another institute we're working with closely or students that we might want to include. So I always recognize there is some urgency to try to get these things started, right? When you have a vacancy, there's work to be done, but to take a pause and really think about, is there something I could do differently? And this could yield some more diversity, or at least diverse perspectives to your process. Okay. So then let's see, we'll go to the next slide here. So job announcement and outreach. So as I mentioned before, and quoting my colleague Dave, a lot of this work happens to increase the diversity of your pool at the outreach and posting stage. So to highlight here, and Blair, feel free, you can bring those other bullet points up there too. When a position is posted at CU Boulder, this is going to be synced to our internal and external career site. We always recommend to utilize those networks, memberships, and I feel that it's either a misconception on campus that we can't directly reach out to candidates to invite. And that's not the case. You can do individualized personal outreach. I think this is most impactful, especially when you think of your relationships, your network, and you really want to encourage that word of mouth advertisement. So not just relying on some of these posting locations listed here, but to really put in some effort and energy into this outreach. So again, depending on your role, you could utilize tribal colleges, historically Black colleges and universities. But when it's time to advertise a position, think about contacting people who might help to spread the word. Oh, excellent. I saw this question come in for LinkedIn requiring to pay for advertisement. So at our campus, we partner with all 4 campuses. We have some job slots through LinkedIn. As long as there's availability, we can post a position to that job slot. So that would be at no cost to your department within series, as this is a contract that we have set up. Another free approach is you can share that posting within your network. Again, I think it depends too how involved you are in LinkedIn, but LinkedIn really is that platform for job seekers to get connected, to really network and build those relationships. So just know if you have, I can't guarantee we would post every position within series, as we do need to share the slots with other departments and institutes on campus. But always, if you have an interest, let us know. And that's something that my colleague Blair can help with as well. So when we are getting that posting together. Let's see here. So again, with your committee or folks within your network, you really want to encourage that outreach to networks, as this can help to increase our underrepresented candidates in the group. Think about those professional organizations, newsletters, listservs. If you have a virtual conference that you're attending, are there folks you might be able to connect with there to get the word out? And I think it's always important too, and I know Susan will touch on this as well, that I think about recruiting as a year-long process. So that doesn't mean you have a requisition open all year, but think about those other relationships and networks that you're building, right? Of, are there individuals I can reach back out to, encourage them to apply, or they might be candidates to encourage as well. So keep in mind, especially when you are reaching out to those individuals, that it's not a guarantee that they would be advanced in the process. This is an invitation to encourage them to apply. And you have to keep in mind too, we're not targeting gender, race, age, or anything like that. That's not the point of this outreach. It's thinking about our qualifications again. As a federal contractor at CU Boulder, we're required to have an affirmative action plan every year, as Dave had mentioned. And by law, we're setting some of these placement goals. However, that doesn't mean, again, to reiterate what Dave said, to say, I'm going to hire a woman into this role or a person of color. Again, it's really the efforts in what you're taking for your outreach. So let's see. And I did see a question come in. Let's see. Excellent. Yes. So Susan, actually, she's going to talk about the next one. So before I turn it over to her, I wanted to highlight one of the tools that we have in-house, which is called Textio. So Textio is an augmented writing tool. It looks at the language of our job posting to determine, is this inclusive? Is it encouraging to candidates? Is this, going to speak more to a male or female population? What age demographics are in consideration? Is there corporate cliche language? So know that for all of our positions on campus, we are running our postings through this software. And typically my approach, and in collaboration with Blair, I see some minor changes, right? So it could be as simple as, instead of saying, we are recruiting for a senior professional research assistant, instead we might say, we are encouraging applications. And a small word change like that can be pretty impactful. And Susan, she's going to talk about this a bit more as far as what an inclusive job posting looks like. But know that, this tool is supplemental. Yes, and to answer your question, Mike, they are. So typically, if I'm seeing small changes, I may not reach out to highlight those, but I'm always happy to share my screen or have a call so that you can see real time what the system is proposing. So we aren't just relying on every change that's proposed, but it's pretty interesting to see. So know that I'm always happy to meet with you to highlight that. I know Jimena and a couple folks on the series HR team have seen this as well. And it's pretty interesting as far as what comes through. And I'll segue this to Susan in saying, when you think about an inclusive job posting, I think sometimes it's just as important of what you're not in the posting as it is in what you're highlighting. So with that, Blair, we can head to the next slide. And Susan, I'll turn this over to you to talk a little bit about these elements here.
Okay, thank you, Casey. Could you pull up the points, please, Blair? Thank you. The question about what do you actually put in your announcement, and like Casey said, those small word changes can make a big difference. Our series jobs tend to skew invitational to women, and in part that's because cooperative is in our name. But anytime that you talk about supporting a community of, say, forecasters, or anytime you use words like that, it tends to be more encouraging, more invitational. Some of the things that you might want to do are to include an engaging overview of the position, which focuses on the contribution that position will make to the mission. A lot of people are very inspired by the series mission and by the NOAA mission. A lot of the people, the potential employees that I talk to, want to make sure that they're doing work that's going to matter to society. So I've seen some excellent job ads come through series. There was one that talked, you know, I'm not in this field, so to me it looked like wonky data science language, but then it said, this is going to help build a food and security system for the nation. And that right there lets potential applicants know that the work that you do here is going to matter to people. So that's important. You can talk, as Casey mentioned, you can include a section about the diversity aspirations of the institution. When we have our strategic plan finished, you can link to that. You can link to the idea plan from CU. There's all kinds of ways to show that you're an organization that cares about diversity. In the chat, there was a question about looking at the qualifications, and there is a reality that a lot of the people that you want to recruit to apply will not apply if they don't have every single one of your preferred or desired qualifications in addition to the minimum qualifications. So sometimes hiring managers think that if we say this long list of both required and desired qualifications, that we're going to be getting the most qualified people. But it turns out that if there's a laundry list, it can actually turn people away from applying. So when I review an ad, I'm always asking the committee or the hiring manager, are all of these qualifications really required, or are they desired? And can they be flexible? Thinking really, really strongly about what needs to be in there and what doesn't. And then lastly, you can include a qualification in your desired qualifications that says something like ability to contribute to the inclusive excellence goals of CU. And there's some language that you can use. When you put that in, it's open, as Dave so well described earlier. That's a qualification that's open to anyone of any identity. If people have done work in this area before, this gives them an opportunity to talk about it. And so just a few of those things, there's more you can do, but if you took action on just these few things, it would go a long way to making the job announcement more inclusive. So next slide, please. When you're looking at recruiting, we did see a pretty significant diversity in our applicant pool in that year that Dave showed in our data. And there's a lot of things that are actually happening now and that you can do as a search committee member or a hiring manager as part of the search committee. Now, first of all, there's already a lot of existing outreach. The all of our ads go to hundreds of potential job lists, many of which reach diverse and all kinds of diverse groups. And it's up to the managers of those lists whether or not they want to share our post. But in addition to that, our jobs go to some discipline-specific lists, such as the Earth Science Women's Network. I take all of our jobs to conferences such as National Association of Black Geoscientists, American Indian Science and Engineering Society, the Society for the Advancement of Chicano, Hispanic, and Native Americans in Science. All of our jobs go with me when I go to those places. We sometimes have access to resume databases, and so for particular jobs, you can ask me to look through those resume databases that we have access to for a short time. Word of mouth is important. This is a place where capitalizing on that professional network that you've hopefully been building all year, where that's important. I've seen organizations that do a really good job of having every person in the work group share open positions with their social networks and ask their professional contacts to share the job ad. And I've seen some of our job ads get out very widely into really specialist and subgroups within the discipline, where people that you would want to apply are there who have the technical background. There are looking at your professional organizations in your subdiscipline, looking at committees for different identity groups within that committee, and getting involved or reaching out to those committees to share positions. You can make personal invitations, reach out to people that you know, potentially including people internally that might be interested in the job, or asking other people to send that job out as far as they can. Now, one thing you can do to mid-search to find out if your pool is diverse is you can ask Dave to run a demographic report on your applicant pool so far, and you can use that information to decide, do we want to recruit further? How are we doing? And so this data is an example of one result of doing that. So we looked at the available workforce in that subdiscipline based on NSF numbers for that subdiscipline. And then we looked at the demographics of the applicant pool, and we looked at the demographics of the shortlist. And you can see that there are some differences between the pool that we were able to recruit and the pool that went forward to the shortlist. But you can use this kind of information to make decisions about how your search is doing. And you can ask me to ask Dave, and I can work with Dave to do this in a consistent way, because we don't ask for it very often, but we could. Sorry, Dave. And then some of our groups at Ceres have some really good discipline-specific databases that they've put together. Earth Lab in particular at Ceres and the NCCAST, North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, they have a very good Excel spreadsheet that they put together that is all of the social media accounts, the professional society committees, people, faculty at minority serving institutions, all the people that likely have connections to a diverse group of qualified candidates, and then they just send their positions out. I've talked with some of you about doing a similar kind of effort for your discipline or for your jobs. I think that we can have a set of these kinds of databases that we can use. And it's not something that I can generate on my own without your participation, because I don't know your disciplines the same way that you do. But I think that we can set something like this up if you want me to. within your work groups, and it wouldn't take more than a few hours to knock out. So that's something actionable that we can do at a higher level with your participation. So that's it for that slide. And I'll turn it back over.
Thanks, Susan. I appreciate that. And actually, yeah, just want to touch base with some of the stuff you mentioned as well. And in response to, I think it was Rebecca's question about the language in there, it's also something to keep in mind of if you do have a potential for any international hires, people who aren't US citizens, we have to keep in mind that job posting language for those. So it depends on the type of role, but sometimes for that, if you want to apply for a visa or permanent residency later on, when they look at that, if you have a bunch of qualifications in there, they will consider not only the minimum qualifications, but anything in your preferred qualifications is actually required qualifications. So in order to get their visa, they have to have all of those qualifications. So it's something to keep in mind when you're working with Susan and the HR team and Jimena and everyone over there about what you put in there, because it could have some impact on our international hires and for later on in visa purposes. So just keep that in mind as well. I'm not an expert on those, so you'll want to work with our ISSS team on that, but just to be aware if you have any potential of those type of hires.
And David, if you allow me to add something, we have the luxury of having our own experts in visa and immigration. That is Janet Garcia. And so one of the things she always says that comes back to what you just talked about with the required qualifications. So in the CUA, this will come as what we require. And there's a second section that says what you will need. Finally, you have what we would like you to have with the set of qualifications. So it's very important that in the minimum qualifications, what we require, you just minimize it and put 2 lines, one on the degree and one in years or type of experience. Because when we're talking about the wage that you must pay for people who are on a specific visa, the H-1 visa, you have to meet the prevailing wage. So if your minimum required qualifications is a line of 15 things, maybe we won't be able to meet the prevailing wage based on, on the recommendation, and that's going to come out of the minimum requirements qualification. So keep that for, short, just 2 lines, and put anything that is required as a hard skill in the what you will need section. Thank you.
Sweet, thanks, Jimena. Appreciate that. So we'll kind of jump ahead and we'll talk about another type of bias. And like I said, it's not the only one that comes into play, but this is a common one that occurs at this kind of step of the process. And it's expedience bias. It's taking those mental shortcuts to confirm our beliefs or ignoring other evidence. It's a little bit about confirmation bias, but it's basically trying to get things done as quickly as possible. And some examples of doing that, saying it'll take too much time or cost too much money to post to these other avenues. Let's just do what we have done in the past. So what we say is, again, it takes a little bit of time. It takes working through this, deciding how you're going to do the job posting, going through, but thinking through each step. Going back to what your questions, your interview questions were last time, saying what question worked well. This question didn't really get to any type of answer that we really wanted. I don't think that's appropriate there. What else do we want to do? What should we change? And it's evaluating those and seeing what worked well for each search as you're going through, and doing these critical steps. And then, like we said, adding those additional questions, other type of things you might want to look for, like those diversity qualifications. So it sounds like it's a lot of work on the front end, but it helps you later on when you're trying to sort through your candidates, do your evaluation, and figure out who you're going through on that. So just some examples of what experience bias is in, and we'll see if we can get a poll launch this time. I don't know, Blair, if that's going to pop up. I saw something for a second there. There we go. So there we go. A poll for experience bias, multiple choice. So just click on there, the interactive piece, and give me some examples of what experience bias is. And I think you can select all the ones that apply. Or examples of experience bias. All right. I think we can wrap it up. I don't know if we see some results there. Nice. All right. So I think most of that was right. So obviously you got the gist of what we were describing there. It's like, like I said, well, we should just post a job where we posted last time because it worked. Sometimes it might work, and there might be some successful places you went to, but it's taking that critical eye, looking at the data. We can pull Google Analytics. We can see how, if you were happy with the applicant pool, looking at those and saying, did we like the type of applicants, the type of people we interviewed last time, and taking a look at that. Don't have time to reach out to new networks, which is kind of tied in with the third option, which is not example experience bias. Is actually what we recommend doing. Is I know what we're shorthanded. We need to take the time to make sure we get the right hire. And I think that's always a struggle. I think all of us know, especially if we're shorthanded, we need someone to help out. I've been in those roles where we said, I don't really care who you get. We just need someone to help right away because I'm drowning over here. But it's taking that time, what you need to go through the process. Because it's as much as time you take to make a hire, if you make the wrong type of hire, you're going to have to go through it all over again for the next time. So it's doing what you can to get the correct person, right, what you're looking for, and moving past, just trying to do getting somebody in as quickly as possible. So jump to the next one.
Blair, I'm going to have you actually move over to the next slide beyond this one, and I'm going to cover it all in one. Oops, I'm realizing my video is not on. Here we go. So yes, so actionable items. Thank you. So right now we're talking about evaluating applications. And so what's important here is we're going to share a list of some do's and don'ts. But so on this list, and I'll walk you through this, what you want to make sure is that you're utilizing a rubric. It can be any kind of rubric, Excel spreadsheet, your own notes. But going back to the position description and looking at and discussing with the search committee what that criteria is. And, some of that criteria, it might be subjective, like an excellent research record, as an example. So really fleshing out what that means. And ideally, you would have done that when you're developing the position description, but that might not always be the case. There's always going to be subjectivity. So just tying some parameters to what excellent research record means and really looking at it as all of the criteria and doing that for each of the criteria before you review those applications. And then as you go on, you start to review the candidates, making sure that you're reviewing the candidates' materials along and comparing it with the criteria. At this point, it can be easy to start comparing candidates. We don't want to do that at this stage. You'll start doing that more so on the interview stage, the finalist stage. So just compare the candidates to the criteria at this point. And then there's a handout that we have available called the potential influence of unconscious bias. And it starts to provide examples of where bias may come up, as well as strategies that you can use, mental simulations. And so as you start to think about this process, and Casey mentioned this, Dave mentioned this as well, is you really want to slow down, give yourself adequate time to review and evaluate these applicants. If you're starting to feel tired or stressed out, which we're all feeling all of the time, especially in this remote learning environment, come back when you feel refreshed so that you can look at the candidates from a refreshed perspective. It makes a world of a difference. Similarity bias in the research tells us that, we're going to find something in common with candidates that we favor. And so if you're realizing that a candidate is strong enough with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they presented, the research, the background that they have, but you're just not moving them forward for some reason, if you find something in common with that candidate, you're making that, you're taking the initiative to do that can be a strategy, then to help recalibrate bias. You can also help to mitigate bias by running mental simulations. So substituting a different organization or gender. We don't know how folks necessarily identify, but this is just a trick to do with your mind. An institution, if there's an institution you favor, but you're seeing an institution on this person's application that you don't recognize, substitute it for an institution that you value. See if that recalibrates any of bias that might be at play. So again, using a rubric, tying the qualifications and criteria listed to those qualifications, and running some of these mental simulations will help. Also making sure to come to an agreement to be able to challenge one another should you see bias coming up, and to challenge yourself throughout the process can be incredibly helpful and useful. Okay, we're going to go into the next slide, and these are don'ts. And I'm going to just count on my team to help me with the questions, but I'm going to go through this. I'm in the interest of time trying to get through these pieces. So we recommend that you avoid using social media to learn more about an applicant. This helps to, you want to think about not only protecting the search process, but also protecting the candidate's experience. And what you might find when you're, looking up social media or looking at information that they didn't provide to you, you can find information that's irrelevant to the job, to the work that they would be doing, and to potentially protected class information. And it's tempting for some folks because they say, well, if we're thinking about diversity in different ways, this could be a way to get that information. There's different ways to learn about the experiences that people have and the way that they can contribute to your diversity inclusive work. It's not going to be by going through and finding out what clubs or organizations or they are, or by visually looking at who they are. So we just want to be careful, because if a candidate looks back and thinks about why they weren't selected in the process and they knew that some of that was happening, that their social media was being looked at, that could be a potential discrimination claim. So just be careful there. And then avoid making assumptions about an applicant's motivation. Again, this can come up when you're thinking. And it could be good intention. Does this candidate really want to move here to this environment? They're coming from the East Coast or West Coast, very diverse environments. They might have a hard time here. Just avoid making those assumptions. They did apply. And the interview can really help uncover a lot of those pieces. You can ask about that. Another piece that you want to think through is that term. When we start talking about, oh, this person would be a good fit or wouldn't be a good fit, what does that really mean? And getting each other to talk about that, because a search member may be thinking about, well, the knowledge, skills, and abilities and how those apply or don't, or they might be thinking about culture fit. Or if you start to hear this candidate's overqualified, they're either qualified or not to do the work. And we can start going down the route of, that person being older, or age discrimination might come into play. So we just really want to be careful. And again, create that space where you can have these conversations to be able to ask questions. And I say challenge each other, but it's really asking each other questions to talk through that a bit more. Okay, there were a number of questions coming up. So I'm going to.
Yeah, Teresa, I think the one that you can address are some comments about blinding. So they just ask, is blinding an option? Would they come in application with names? So if you can talk about blinding, that'd be awesome.
Sure, that's great. Thank you for watching those, Dave. So yes, there is this idea of blinding in the process, or what we'll call covering applicant information. So this would mean, that the thought here is that, well, if we cover a person's name and identifying information, then that will at least help candidates get through the process without the search committee making assumptions about those candidates from the very beginning. Our stance is to think about ways to implement mitigation strategies and really commit to educating ourselves about bias throughout the process. So reviewing articles, schema charts, tips about bias throughout the process, because covering or blinding information, what that's going to do is it may help in some ways at the beginning. When you're not seeing information, it's an incredible administrative task to take on, and you can't cover all information. And so especially when you start to get down into the different disciplines, you're going to kind of know who's in the field at some point, or be able to make an inference of who a person is. And really what we find is that blinding delays bias until a later stage. So if I'm blinding this person's their application materials, well, when we get to the interview stage, I'm still going to see who this person is and still see how they're presenting themselves. And so if we're not making that commitment to reducing our own bias throughout the process, it can come up at later stages. And it will, because it's unconscious. So we have to think about that and a plan for that in different ways. Any other questions there, Dave, that came up?
There was a question to Teresa that I wanted to address. Somebody asked about LinkedIn. You are allowed to go on LinkedIn, absolutely. And there's some other professional profiles that you can, professional websites that you can absolutely go to. And any websites that are provided in the candidate's CV package, go ahead, and go for them, unless they list Facebook, of course.
Absolutely, and that's all information that is relevant to the person's job or to the work, so they're able to control what information they're putting in, knowing that employers are looking at that information. So Jimena, yeah. is absolutely right. I don't need to add any more to what you added, because that was great. Anything else? Okay. I'm gonna move.
Hey, Teresa, this is Daniel. I have one real quick question, if I may.
Sure.
You mentioned kind of determining whether applicants would be willing to move to the area. And this has come up a lot for me in this last hire, primarily because we're in a virtual setting. So I've been getting a lot of applicants from all over the place. And it's usually our expectation for NSIDC that our applicants will move to the area eventually. And so I've been trying to make that upfront as part of like my phone screen and things like that. But do you have any other recommendations of like how to make that expectation reasonable or kind of front and center?
Yeah, Daniel, thank you for the question. I think what you named is a great strategy. Just being as transparent as you can up front. You can include that information in the job posting and just reiterate it. Because sometimes, like with anything, people need to hear things a few different times and in different ways, especially as they're thinking about this big change, this big move. So I would say in the job posting ad, this position's remote right now for the time being, but that the expectation is that you continue in person. Once we're able to do that. And then just making that clear as you're setting folks up for their interviews, asking if they have any questions, and then sharing that information then as well. So a few different times does not hurt.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Anything else? I'm having a little trouble seeing the questions because something's
I can highlight, there's one recent one that came through today, so around talking more about overqualified obstacles for hiring. Do you want to start with that, and then we can have other team members jump in?
Sure. I'm just trying to, Casey, I'm wondering if I need some clarification on that. So are you clear on that question, just overqualified obstacles?
Yeah, it might be helpful for that participant if you could share a little more context there, just so we can best address it.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know if there was any more to that one.
So if you are comfortable sharing for that participant who submitted that question, again, I know Teresa had highlighted this of, we cannot reject applicants for being overqualified, either candidates are qualified or not. And perhaps at what you're alluding to, and again, let me know if I'm off point, is, you see an incredibly experienced candidate who applies, and perhaps you're wondering, this seems like a lower level than what you're working. The interview stage is that opportunity to ask, right? To get that understanding of, why are you interested in this role? And I think it could be very telling for those candidates to share. Perhaps they're looking to reduce their responsibilities for better work-life balance, or there's other reasons there. But that's one approach is, again, you want to make sure you are looking at those qualifications. Candidates cannot be overqualified, but to really have some strategic questions in the interview process to learn more about them. So does that help answer? Are we on the right track for that? Yes. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Great explanation, Casey. Thank you. Just wasn't sure if there was more to that one, and that was great. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on over to the next slide. And we actually have a little bit more time than I thought, so thanks for clarifying. So with this one, we're going to start talking a little bit about biases. Those will pop up, as you've already seen, in different ways. But similarity bias, and I mentioned this, is definitely one of those. It's this: people tend to favor those with similar backgrounds or experiences. So that example, wow, if that person graduated from the same college I did, I know they have a strong background because I know this institution. So again, that mitigation strategy of changing the degree. See if that changes the narrative, institution, the name, gender of applicants, and just see if that might help recalibrate the any bias that's at play and helps you think about that and evaluate that candidate in a different way. So we're going to try a poll again now and see if that pops up, and want you to think about what are the examples of similarity bias. Okay, here you go. All right, so close that up and bring up the poll results. And yes, yep. So just again, thinking about how similarity bias can come up, and this can be challenging. You know, this is challenging for me to do. And I'm like, oh, I know this person would be great because I know this program and what this program has to offer, but really challenging ourselves to look beyond and learn a little bit more about some of these other programs we're not familiar with or institutions. Because that one response, we need people with different skills and abilities to diversify our team. Going back to the why is critical here as these biases come into play. Okay, so I'm going to turn this on over to Jimena to talk about a framework for successful interviews.
Alrighty, thank you. So as a lot of you know, we have a hiring guide, and that lives within Insight series under the Forms tab. So I just put the link there. I always say it is not a good idea to print it because we are revising it based on your feedback all the time. Whenever we get new resources after this presentation, I'm going to go back in and put some more information based on questions that have come up. So the hiring guide is a very important resource in ensuring that you're being compliant with the law and that you're being fair. The hiring guide contains an infinite numbers of sample questions, do's and don't guides for interviewing, notes on how to ask the visa question to the applicant, information on requesting offer letters, templates, instructions on how to disposition, a sample regret letter. We also list the places where we post. We give you tips for what to do and not to do as soon as you start that search. So it's a very good guide, which will help you mitigate bias itself. We talked about the search committee and how a diverse search committee is a powerful tool when trying to neutralize biases such as the similarity bias that Teresa just discussed. When talking about the elements of the job description, I want to emphasize that when you're posting, you're going to be asked for a summary of the position, job duties, the required education and experience, the must-have skills, and the desired skills. So really, if something is not absolutely required and you are able and willing to train on the job, then put it as a desired skill. And we can even add a statement. We have been doing that when you feel comfortable with that, saying that as long as you have the required skills, you're encouraged to apply. Okay, so think about, does your position require a PhD, or is a master's degree and relevant experience sufficient? Of course, if it's a research-focused position with the title of research associate, you must have the PhD, of course. Teresa already spoke of the relationship between the rubric and the selection, right? So in one of our last searches, we did that, right? So just do different columns that your candidates go in different rows, and you pick the minimum qualifications, and then you have your desired qualifications. And this is not to say that choosing your candidate will be the result of an obscure mathematical equation, but you need to have solid, legitimate justification of why you're selecting someone. And you also have examples of rubrics in the hiring guide that we have for series. Okay, so consistent interview practices. I get this question all the time. Can I ask different questions to different candidates? And the answer is yes, you can, you should, and you will. And the idea is that you have the same interview format for all the candidates, the same length of time allotted for each candidate, and the same initial script, but you will naturally depart from that script, and that is completely acceptable. Offer and negotiation, we have some new information related to the Colorado Equal Pay Act becoming effective January 1st, 2021. our Series Central HR would not leave any positions up and running being advertised that do not offer a salary range. Also, if you will offer relocation, we need to say that, we need to add a sentence. So either relocation is offered or not, we need to be transparent. And of course, I'll be in contact with my hiring supervisor, so don't freak out. We have our expert Luan line, who is our payroll person or our main payroll person, and she's working on our ranges. But that is for any position that remains posted starting January 1st, 2021. Remember, salary is based on education and prior experience and not on a candidate's prior salary. I ask that you please share your salary amount with your series lead and with me before you make a verbal offer. We in Series HR have all the salary information by lab, by group, by career track. We take into consideration years since degrees and additional education. This check-in with me and with your series lead before making a verbal offer helps us flag compensation inequities and issues of compression, which is when a new employee is hired at a considerably higher rate than someone who is a current employee. Any questions? I have a question from Irina, and it says, would salary range help or hurt the application pool? The truth is that it will clarify. So when you have your B-TAS2 fund or your grant from the National Science Foundation, you know that for your associate scientist position, you may hire an associate scientist 1 or an associate scientist 2, and the ranges are going to be wide, but they're going to be public. So you will not be able to say, I'm going to hire for this associate scientist 1 position between 50 and 60 and hire at 65. That will not be acceptable, but it's going to provide you with the right kind of candidate, and it's going to help with expectations. You can say PRA, we're open to PRA 1, associate scientist 1, 50, 60, associate scientist 2, 60, whatever it is, and we can definitely help you. So it will help clarify it, and we're just, at the beginning of this is just being born. But we will absolutely offer all the feedback and information that you need. And as I said before, we have our expert Luan line who spent I don't know how much time looking at all of our salary ranges, one consultation with Central HR, and this will continue to be a collaboration. Any other questions right now? Okay,
yeah,
so go to the next.
I have a question. Sorry,
Yes.
yeah, it's Audrey talking about the salary. I just don't fully understand what is behind this law in terms of equity, because we were talking about the same job. So like the range would be the same for the same type of jobs. And I'm not sure to understand what it means, the same type of jobs, because when we are building a team, every single person is actually doing a different job, even though they're assistant, so my question is that same job means same title, such as research assistant or research scientist, or it's more than that? Because it says something like linked to the education, linked to, and I'm not sure to understand what is behind the same, or yeah. So yes.
So when you're talking about being transparent with the range, I have never hired at Series an associate scientist 1, but higher, making $80,000. So that's what it goes after, right? So he's saying about an associate scientist, if I announce it, or I could say it's professional research assistant, associate scientist 1 will be between such and such. The jobs don't have to be equal. We know that positions like software developer and that those positions that have to do with enterprise data may have their own ranges. But what we're talking about is apple to apples, right? So people performing the same type of job. And if a job is qualified and is open for an associate scientist, there won't be a $20,000 difference. we are looking right now at a broad salary range, but that it is representative of a certain level depending on the duties of the job. It could be different jobs, but you can still be in the same. So it could be completely two different jobs. Somebody can be doing research and somebody can be working at a lab and doing a more technical skills. But if the different jobs fall within the same career track of associate scientist one, they're going to be similar. Of course, we can say that different funds, different funding sources they don't have to be identical, of course. And two people are never identical, right? In their duties, in their education, in their experience, in what they bring to the table. We already are doing we already have career tracks. We already have salary bands. We already work with the hiring leads in determining where this person is going to be hired at. We're just going to be looking at it more closely, and it's going to be posted, but it's really not that different from what we do at Series today.
Okay, great. Because I just to finish, because there was this example given that, for example, someone who is doing science in neuroscience, a professor would be different than a professor that is working in social science, and then because this is two different jobs, like a neuroscience professor cannot teach for social science. I don't know if I'm clear here. And the vice versa is true too. So a social scientist cannot teach or do science in neuroscience. That's two different jobs. Therefore, they will have different salaries. And this I don't understand, because different salaries means different numbers, not that different. There is one that's lower than the other. And so for me, a neuroscience professor should earn the same as a social science. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? So inside Series, yeah, that comes from there, like to be clear about what we want for equity salary, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm familiar that the professors of different subjects do make, when I finished school, I got a position as a professor of literature, and the salary range that I was hired at was completely different from people hired in an economics department. But I really am not familiar with what is happening with CU today. I don't know when it comes to professors' positions, if the salaries are equivalent or not, depending on subject. I don't know if someone else has data. Dave?
Yeah, but this is really getting to the Colorado Equal Pay Act and what's required under that. So a lot of this, we have no discretion. And so there really is no discussion of what we can do on this. The Colorado law is basically changing how we're gonna have to do our job posting, where to put it. It's requiring these salary postings, what we have to put in, we have to distinguish our jobs. If you've been working with Kim on our side, and unfortunately anything that's gonna be any positions that are tied through CU, we have to come up with what are called compensation codes, where we're linking together people who do similar type of work and roles across the campus based on experience, length of service, merit, and going through this. But what we can't use are negotiation and market. So market cannot be used as a way of setting salaries. It was one of the specific purposes behind the law, because it's what out there, the data, what they're showing is the market is discriminatory against women, just the way the salaries are. So that's the whole purpose behind that. So you can't use those type of things. You have to point to things in that. And so part of those, as Casey mentioned, the chat going through, we can't hire outside of the range we have to go through. So a lot of the flexibility we had in the hiring process is going to go away. So we have to be really careful of what we're putting into our posting, the salaries we're going through and doing that. So a lot of it's set just unfortunately through kind of legal practices and what we have to do on that side.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, so we can go to the next slide. I think we still have like 7 or 8 slides, so we might need to move a little bit faster.
Yeah, Jimena, thank you for that. So what we just decided behind the scenes is this is great discussion, but we've also been covering a lot of the content based on your wonderful questions. So we're going to go ahead and move on over to Susan. So Blair, if you can skip this slide and move to the next one, and just Jimena and Susan will be focusing on your slides at this point moving forward. But
Okay.
again, please ask any questions you have throughout. Sorry, I couldn't give you more of a heads up there.
That's all right. That's all right. This is another strategy that you can use to understand what your applicants are bringing to the table when it comes to diversity and inclusion questions. So the inclusive excellence documents at CU refers to an inclusive workplace where diversity and differences are valued and leveraged, promotes an environment that's welcoming, is able to share and engage with diverse perspectives, maximizes the success and inclusion of all. And so if you're trying to figure out if an applicant is going to be able to contribute to that part of our CU mission, you can ask some performance-based kinds of questions in your interview process, and then people can speak to that. So earlier we talked about potentially having a diversity desirable qualification. Some of our positions may ask for a diversity statement. That's very common in academia these days. And then if you want people to expand on that during the interview, you can ask them some questions like these. Share with us your philosophy around diversity and inclusion. That's going to tell you if people have a philosophy around diversity and inclusion. Give us an example of how you've practiced this philosophy. So what have you done to contribute to diversity and inclusion in your unit? Questions like that are ways that people can really shine their experience and show you the quality of their thinking in this area, and are absolutely encouraged as part of your interview process. So that's it for that slide. Next slide. See, this is not me.
Yep, so we're going to skip over this one and move on over to, let's see, to the closing out. Yep, perfect. Perfect. Yep, with Jimena.
Alrighty, so we really want to take care of our candidates. Remember that you're being evaluated in all the interaction with your candidates, and you're being interviewed as much as you're interviewing them. Top candidates have a lot of, or many or several interviews, so you want to make sure that whenever they're asking you a question that you don't know how to answer, just send them to us. Write a ticket to SiriusHR Colorado EDU. We'll be happy to find out all the information that they need, that they're asking from. Make sure whenever you're talking about an offer, it is the Sirius supervisor, the person who's making the offer, either for salary or relocation, as opposed to one of our federal partners. And we're always delighted to help with any questions. When it comes to notice of regret or disposition, we have two different types. One is sent to a candidate who was never interviewed by you or with whom you had minimum interaction. And that will be a customary regret that my good friend Blair will be sending from Avature. Now, if you have a candidate that you interviewed and you don't know if you're gonna fall back into to make an offer, make sure that after that offer letter has been signed, and not until then, that you write a nice regret letter to them, and you have those templates in the hiring guide again. I'm gonna ask you two things for any hiring supervisor starting a search. One is that you please keep a list, Google Doc, an Excel spread of why every single candidate is now moving over to the next step or to the next phase in the search. And that is helping with being fair and thinking through your answers and thinking through your candidate evaluation. Go back to your rubric and make sure that you find what is the reasons for this candidate not moving forward. Every application received must be evaluated. If you have a ton of work and you look suddenly at Avature and you're in horror because you have 50 applicants and you know you won't be able to get to that poll for a while, just pause it, okay? We can always try to convince Blair to allow us to open it back again. No, I'm kidding, he will. And so if you have a ton of applications, just pause the ad, please. If it comes to the end of the posting and you have 20 applicants that you haven't reviewed, I'm going to ask you to review them. Please, you have to review everybody who applied, who spent 3 hours writing, handcrafting a cover letter. Let's see. For the candidates who will be housed at DSRC, you will need to stay in touch with your access verifier. Right now, we're having about 1 month, until we clear people. It depends on the labs, but always count with at least 3 to 4 weeks before you, well, somebody is trying to get their car started, before you set on the start date. So we don't want to have to go back on what we said, right? So first talk to your access verifier if you're in one of the NOAA labs and ask them, can you get me clearance for this person in 3 weeks? It's never going to be less than 3 weeks. And then for a foreign national, it could be 2 months to several months. Some units have the ability to work with finance and your lead and the Office of Exports Control and the Office of Information Security and set up a person who is outside the country, not in the US, outside the country, waiting on a visa to start working from abroad. But your grant has to allow for it. And then of course, we will help you through the process. But talk to us before you offer a salary and before you set a start date. Talk to me. I'm always delighted to talk to you and to run you through the process. After you have a verbal acceptance, you will ask, not are you a US citizen or what country are you a citizen from, but you will ask, are you currently legally authorized to work in the US, or will you need a visa sponsorship now or in the future? The person may be having an OPT card, but then it expires in 3 months. So just say, or in the future. And in the hiring guide, you have that question verbatim, and you can look at that. And remember the onboarding process. We're sending all of our applicants through the Quick Start Program orientation that is run by Central HR. We're going to talk to them about benefits. They're going to talk to them about my CU information portal. They're going to talk to them about the required courses, including trainings, including the one on discrimination and sexual harassment. And make sure that you participate in that onboarding. In the hiring guide, there is a beautiful, beautiful page that I have included for you at the very end of the hiring guide on onboarding and what to do in the first week, in the previous days, in the first week, in the first month, within the first year to make sure that your candidate gets onboarded or I don't want to say assimilated, but feels part of your organization and learns the ropes. And if you're a DSRC, you must absolutely put your candidate in touch with Lucia Harrop. She knows everything about the DSRC building. She's amazing, a great resource. She's going to help you not only with a CAC card and be helpful to your newcomer, but also she's going to educate your candidate on anything that is related to now on the federal side. And I want to stop right here just because we have 5 minutes and I want people to ask questions.
Thank you so much, Jimena. And Blair, I think, and we'll make sure, I just want to highlight for folks, we will share this recording with the series team to distribute as appropriate. We can also provide a copy of these slides for your reference. And my only closing thoughts here, and again, want to open it up in case there's any lingering questions, is one, know that everybody has bias. But what's important is to be able to recognize it when it comes up, and then to try to use some of these strategies to mitigate it. And I also like to highlight here too, you don't have to be an expert, right? We went over a ton of information with you today, and we hope you found it valuable or new. But know that the HR team, whether we're Central HR or the Exceptional Series HR team, we're here to help you every step of the way. So again, I'd love to open it up with the 4 minutes we have if there's any lingering questions, but just very much appreciate you attending today. So any questions, if you want to take yourself off mute or send it in the chat. And again, we're happy to address questions even offline. So we have our contact information. But just know that if you have anything else you'd like to ask, we are here and ready to help.
No, looks like folks are dropping off, but yeah, definitely people are keeping us going in the chat, and there was also private questions coming into the chat. So thank you for being interactive and taking part in the presentation.
Yes, thanks everybody. Thanks for your commitment and work around this, and happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays. Okay, and Blair, I think since most folks are departing, we